And when I will tell you that we are live, we start just presenting, and that's it. You have the floor. Yeah. And me and Gabriela will stay here.
Yeah.
So we are live. So good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight, even live or recording. Nație prin educație, and in collaboration with City Interaction Lab from Paris. I will let Gabriela introduce Liubov, and hope you'll enjoy it. It's a very interesting session. Thank you.
Welcome to this fabulous event, and thank you, Liubov, so much for our partnership. What I can share about Liubov is she's a big supporter of science. She's an amazing science engager. She's involved in science and in art. So the floor is yours. Please share us about your projects and specifically about the event this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting. And it's actually, in general, it is a common event, not only with City Interaction Lab, but also with Gaurav Tapak from India, with whom we are today. And he kindly agreed to join us because actually, thanks to experience of people who are really working with real cities, what we will be talking about today, it is actually possible to run something like this, as something about cities and do the real city analysis. And thank you for presentation, first of all, Anna and Gabriela. We will talk today a little bit about cities and about, most importantly, some professions which did not exist before, like before maybe 20th century, and which started to appear now while the urbanization scale started to grow. So it is something which I am interested as a mathematician and a computer scientist, and also which people who are like Gaurav from urban planning, right, are interested just because it is the bread, the essence of how to live together in cities. So the kind of the program, right, was in order to us to get to know each other, we will present who we are. Then we will, of course, give you some introduction on the topic. We will have a short break with maybe some city music. If you need a break, please also let me know in the chat. But then afterwards, I will also show you some tricks, how you can participate in order to increase the quality of your life around you. So it's actually possible from your house to do it. And yeah, so let's start with the introduction. I'm born in the East, so I'm working in Paris now, but I was born in Obninsk, in a small city. And then afterwards I moved to bigger lab, and I was working in the universities in Paris and in Berlin. And interestingly also, the universities, right, which I am working on, it's called Center of Research and Interdisciplinarity and Bell Labs in Paris. They are international, right? So we know already that now our world, our globe is basically, our world is very globalized. So people don't work in only one place. For example, they manage to work in different places, even not being there, right? And I will let Gaurav also present yourself, maybe just briefly, to present where you come from. And then afterwards, of course, we will talk more about urban planning profession.
Sure. Thank you, Liubov. Thank you very much. So I was born in Bhopal, which is like a city in the central of India, and I have lived in a lot of places over India. I did my education first half majorly in Bhopal, and then I moved to Bengal West Bengal. I lived in Bangalore, Delhi, Tamil Nadu, if you're aware of it. I do not have so much of international mobility as Liubov mentioned for herself. But in all these places, I mean, it was interesting to live and see from the point of view of an architect and an urban planner how diverse these cities are. And I am not very much aware of the context in Europe, but in India, for example, every 100 kilometers or every 50 kilometers, you'll have a very different kind of city. Its characteristics are very different. Its residence qualities are very different. And of course, the terrain also is quite different. You might be aware there's like beaches, there's central highlands, there are Himalayas, there's the northern plains. So it's quite diverse in terms of the geography, in terms of the history of that place. And it's interesting to see how all of this translates into architecture and urban design and how it changes our lives in these cities. So, for example, just like a very short example, probably. So Bhopal, where I was born, it's a tier 2 city. I would say it's a cosmopolitan city. But then when I moved to Kharagpur, which is in West Bengal, which is a totally different language, totally different geographical area, the terrain is very different. The climate is very different. It's more humid. It's more towards the beach. It's more small, just about 3 lakh population. Where Bhopal, it's about 1.4 million population. So the dynamics of relationship between the citizens itself is very different. So how you fit into it and how your spaces fit into it, it's quite different. So that's about my experience living in these so many places, and we'll see as we go on. Currently, I'm working in National Institute of Urban Affairs, which is the think tank of the Government of India for urban affairs. So it deals with the physical aspects of it, so infrastructure, greenery, environment, mobility, transport, all of that, including climate change now that it's a big domain. And then there's economy, there's welfare, social inclusion, all of these aspects combined. So these are the things, and today's workshop is quite interesting to me because recently on a few proposals for Smart City Mission India. And Smart City Mission India is taking out quite well. It has a good impact, and there are good success stories out of it as well. So probably we might be able to explore a few of them in today's workshop.
Yeah, because today's workshop, indeed, as Gaurav said, it's meant to be interactive, of course. I know that some of you are joining online or follow on the streaming, but of course, thank you, Gaurav, for introduction. The main point, right, of the city interaction also lab, as we discussed also with Gaurav, was, of course, to actually run some projects together and to collect and to grasp ideas, not only from the data science perspective, but also from the perspective of the urban planner. For example, in the case of Gaurav, he comes from the background of the urban designer and architecture. But of course, I mean, since we come from big, right, we all come from mostly from big cities, we know what it is, the big city, but each city, as Gaurav also said, is different. And that's why, of course, I wanted to ask you, first of all, I mean, I don't know if you can unmute yourself, but if someone of you can type in a chat, which city in Romania are you from? That would be great, because then it could help us to navigate where you are from, first of all, and also see right? Because Gaurav also said that each city is so different in India, even in one country. It can be very helpful to see if you can type which city are you from. I mean, I know, of course, everyone knows about Bucharest and Cluj-Napoca, right? And whenever you can also type which city are you from, and so that we have some feedback. But meanwhile, I would like to tell that about each city, you can have some information about the city in different forms. You can look at the city in the scale of, right, as also Gaurav said, you can just walk right in the city and also observe something. But you can also make someone to collect the data from the city, right? And for example, here, if you are interested in Romania, for example, there was Open Science Foundation, Open Knowledge Foundation, sorry, which also collected some information about the city of Cluj-Napoca, right? And in this sense, it's quite interesting that nowadays, not leaving your house, you can get information about, I don't know, buildings, about people who live there, and so on. So it's quite an opportunity now that we have in the world to do that. And moreover, there is more information and data about for example, properties of the city. So I don't know if you are familiar with air pollution quantities, but it is also something which sorry for that, which can be also very important, right, for city analysis and for city designers, because if air pollution, for example, in one city is increasing steadily, and you cannot really solve this issue, sometimes people need to wear, I don't know, masks, or to make some measures which will be not really very pleasant for citizens. So then what is actually the profession of the architect, right? What is a profession of urban designer? Maybe someone of you can also type it in the chat, but since we have Gaurav with us, who worked with in a think tank also in India of architect and urban design, maybe Gaurav, you could summarize if you in few words about your experience as a person who worked actually with, right, the urban consulate and with people who are actually taking decisions, because it's probably the main interesting thing, because before we are in school, we are not learning architecture or urban design, so we are not familiar with these professions until we actually start to work with that.
Right. It's a quite relatable story for me. Like you mentioned, that in school we're not told about architecture, and we do not know what architecture is and what an architect can do. So, for example, until after I graduated school, I did not know how do you become an architect. And it's only 2 months after graduation from school, I realized that I want to become an architect. I did not know what an architect does, or what their capacities are, or how do you go further into the profession, and what does it entail for one. But after I entered architecture, which was entirely serendipity, I realized that buildings they're very important to mold one's life. So for example, when you grow up, and if you come across, just randomly walking through a park or somewhere, and you come across a familiar scent of a flower, maybe, or a person, or some warm tea or coffee or something, it directly takes you back to your childhood, where you might have experienced that sense, maybe of hearing, maybe of taste or smell or whatever. In similar manner, architecture does play out. So if Some people, for example, have an experience of living at their grandmother's and sitting by the fire or chatting around a table or something. And when you grow up, these experiences define us as a person. And architects generally do not consider these things, or the soft implications of architecture. How does it play out in one's character? But it does so in very important ways. Like there's an architect, I do not remember which architect, but it's said that in United States there was this architect who once said that to prove the power of architecture, I can design a house which in 6 months would lead to a divorce of a couple, a newly married couple. So the design of the house would be such that it leads to troubles. And on the contrary, a design of the house can also be, not just a house, but any building for that matter, can be such that it brings people together. It generates that sense of kinship, that sense of bonds between people. So architecture is very cursory in that manner. And when I moved into planning, urban planning, I realized what we see, or what I've learned through my 5 years of architecture in undergraduate with respect to a building happens with respect to a city. So all the public spaces where people meet, or the parks where people meet, or a church or a temple, it defines a community. Now, the entity in architecture becomes person, an individual, or maybe a family. But in terms of urbanism and urban planning or design, it becomes a community. It becomes a nation, a neighborhood. It plays out at various scales. And one of the issues, and most of the social issues that you see in our times, in our current world, they have some input from the urbanism itself. So for example, if you talk about protest towards something that some policy that the government is planning out. So in a very democratic country, you need a democratic space to protest, to voice out your opinion. And in such cases, public space becomes very important. Where do people go if they do not have a public space? They cannot sit back at home and always Twitter and maybe Facebook does not help. Digital activism would not help. You need to get out. So you get out on public spaces, you get out on roads, you gather in front of temples or churches or in parks or plazas. This defines very important movements or moments for our society. So most of revolution happens in a public space, right? So this is one of the reasons why a couple of years ago, about I think 5-6 years ago, the only park in Istanbul, when it was being converted into a building, a mall, this decision was taken by the government, the city government, the city council, and people protested in large numbers, and they protested in that same park because the park is an identity for the city. And that's where the second point comes in. As a house or a building is an identity for a person. So what kind of material you use, what kind of house you have. A rich person goes for a very grand house. Maybe someone who's very down to earth would like just a very small cottage, perhaps. So you try to define your surroundings in the image of your own identity. And your surroundings and your physical manifestation of the surroundings itself becomes your identity in a manner. The same happens in a city. So if you have a lot of parks, which this whole green movement and the city beautiful movement started in the US and moved on to the East, introduced a lot of parks into the cities, which were then industrializing about 200 years ago, 200 years ago. So people realize that we need green space for a better life, not just for the environment, but also to socialize. In the same manner, people gather in a plaza. So Roman plazas, or the cities of Rome are famous only for plazas. Cities of ancient Greece had the agoras. So all these public spaces were where most of the philosophy has come up, because people gathered, and that's where culture develops. And culture is again an identity for a community or a nation. So probably I'm able to give some idea of how architecture and urbanism defines a community in ways more than one, and in ways more than we can comprehend at a time. Now, as Liubov said, we can collect data and we can monitor each other sitting in the comfort of our own homes. Smart cities and this whole intervention of data and technology makes it very approachable for everyone. But the problem here is, it's just a question, maybe it's a question for everyone to think of, not just from a very technological point of view, but also from a very philosophical point of view. Can cities be smart with only the technology being introduced? Or do the citizens also have to be smart? And if the citizens have to be smart, how do you bring that change as quick and swift as you make the technology smart? So this is something that we urban designers and urban planners still struggle. But maybe we can find some cues here.
Yes, this is. Thank you, Gaurav, for this very kind of in-depth reply to the question, because indeed the goal of the session today, as also we told you, was to not just to find some solutions to city problems, but also to talk about what urban planners are, right? And maybe you, as young people who are interested in robotics, who are interested in some other technology, could think about what could you bring, right, for your city. So indeed, before to talk about smart cities, right, so let's talk a little bit about why actually in general, why cities. And one of the reasons was that more by some projections, right, and you can check this in our world in data and so on, you can find the information that there will be more than 70% of world population living in cities, which is huge, right? And I guess these estimates are also not really right, very exact, but the idea is that the trend is really increasing. Although now we cannot really guarantee that, because now with, for example, pandemics, there are also some people who are trying to move away from cities and reorganize. And you can also go and check on the Our World in Data, for example, which is this resource over here, in order to grasp some ideas about how the population is distributed in cities, right? If the city is not populated, it looks like it is easier to organize something in the city. Well, actually, it's not true, because the city can be very not walking friendly and only car friendly. But in some cities where the population is huge, for example, right, in some cities in India, it can be a very big challenge to organize the life in cities. And you see that there are some cities, especially here, for example, with more than 10 million people, right, which is quite big number. And also this population analysis is available now in the resource called worldpop.org. It's a resource which also was developed for studying some data available about specifically about the population counts and the population characteristics. So we can, for example, now already again, not leaving the house to work on, for example, where the population is moving, right? And it's a very important aspect of nowadays world. Although, of course, you always need to know some statistics in order to be able to see if you can trust this data, right, or not. So today, in particular, before even to talk about the smart cities, we need to understand why and which role the technology is playing in our world, in our everyday life. And of course, you may also now at the moment be listening this lecture from your mobile phone, right? But you also know, of course, that depending on the data which you give to cities around the globe, you also may actually give a lot of information about how you move, for example. And from that, some companies or some other organizations which collect this data, like telecommunication, right, resources, can also be able to understand how the population moves. So in this way, as also Gaurav said, right, we understand that our technology can give us more information than about, okay, where they want to build the road, but at the same time, they will know how many people will eventually take this road, right? And then it may increase the advertisement on this road. So there is always a trade-off of that. So the regulations which are now imposed, they're very important, therefore. So because we would like to come back to the topic of the smart cities, I wanted to ask you to think about it first, like to self-reflect if you know, actually, if you think that you know the definition which you would give to smart cities. If you have any, you can type or write it, but otherwise, I suggest maybe that we indeed we can also just continue here. And there was one definition of these smart cities, which was given by this in this book by The Future of Cities by Chambers, which was that the smart cities are those that integrate information, communications, technology across 3 or more functional areas. It sounds very maybe complex, but the idea is simple, right? That you do not just have the information that this building is here, but you also gather the information communication, for example, that someone comes from this building to another, right? And you grasp this information and then process it and give it back to the city. So this is essentially one of the main idea of the smart cities. And that was also from 2014. So if you want to learn more, you can also go and check this reference. So I took this picture from the Places journal, where people have tried to reimagine the city as some object, which is you see that it is it looks like a machine, right? It looks like a computer. So people were trying to reimagine the city as the computer, but in fact the city is not a computer, because cities have a lot of information inside them. For example, how many people live in one home, right? And it's something which is much more intricate than that. So benefits of smart cities are that, of course, you can get information about how much traffic, right, can be at this moment between your street, between one place and another, or you can also calculate how many people are in one place at the same time, right? But at the same time, you know that you're losing at this moment, you give the information, you lose the privacy about you, about your location. And as I told you, that there is nowadays this vast amount of data available through social media, such as Facebook and Twitter. They support the development of smart cities, but at the same time, these platforms, right, they also provide some opportunity for some companies also to hack the system. So we should be very careful. Do you have questions? No? Okay. Yeah, I think that indeed there was some problem with sharing the screen. I'm sorry for that. I will go back to the whole screen again. Yeah, so the smart cities, and the main problem of this, right, smart cities challenge is that how much information you want to get, right, to give to people, right. So it can be, for example, how many people leave this house, or how many people are going to use this road, or how many people are going to use another building. And because you have already worked, I think, with different challenges, and you worked with different people who have been working, for example, with technology, right, in first tech challenge in Romania, I prepared for you a board on which we could brainstorm with you together. It is it is opened in the Miro board, and the idea is very simple. That now we will be with you in the imaginary city consulate, and the idea is that there are many problems, right, which come on the table. One problem can be green spaces, right? Another problem can be transportation. Yet another problem can be, for example, social housing, so that it would be available for more people, right? And maybe you can type also here which problems you think can exist here, right? But I just type some problems here for you, because then it would allow us to actually later on brainstorm together, so that we could see what solution could we also make on that problem. So when people talk about the problems, right, we need to specify, and this is the way how you would do it in the imaginary city consulate, right? You would like to understand what exactly is not working well. It's not specification of the problem, but yeah, it can be something which can be this bus station is not accessible for all passengers, or there can be too many cars and no space for bikes, or there can be no clear timetable for transportation, when you don't really know when the bus will come, right? And you don't really know when something will happen. So it's something which often can happen, right? And the idea is that for finding solutions in the transport, you for the city planning, you may have the city kind of spheres, right, to be separated into several different parts. For example, in the transport, in the green spaces, and in housing, right? And I can show you the idea of, sorry for the noise, I don't know what is it, but yeah, so the idea is that the transport, for example, the transportational problems, they are something which people can use the service and support improvements for handicapped people, or like there can be new bus stations, but at the same time there can be solutions, for example, prioritize people with disabilities to collect their feedback on the transportational issues. or make more help centers, right? And if you have any feedback on that, or like some ideas, right, or actions which you want, you can type that in the Miro board here in the link which I can type in the chat, so that you could see more the opportunities. I will just post the link here in the link in the chat. I hope you see that. Do you see that?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, because so the main idea, of course, was to make it a bit more like a gathering session, but I will continue meanwhile so that we don't lose the time for now. And we already specified some problems, right, on the transport and some actions which we could take. But maybe I can make a short break. I mean, not short, but like 1 or 2 seconds, minutes, to just to have you to think about which problems in transportation and in green cities you could think of here. You see my screen, right? Okay, I will share again the presentation on the big screen. Okay. The smart city infrastructure and services and functions, they are the main parts of how you can actually design, right, smart cities. For example, here it is this small parts of Paris, where you have a park and you have some post office, right, and cafes and everything which is around here. It's something which people are every day using, so it's infrastructure and services, but they all have their own function, right? So which of these 3 infrastructure, services and functions do you think is the most important, do you think? So in general, right, we can say that yes, a building is the most important, because the building itself is something which is important to build, right, and to provide it. But in fact, function is also very important. So you also have the opportunity we also have opportunity with you to talk about this infrastructure and to talk more about different maps, right? Because all the infrastructure is usually located on the maps. And here there is a picture which I took also from the old maps of France in this case and in the United States, just to show you that in fact, if I would zoom in one map, right, I would not really be able, and I would not have any indices here. I would not be able to actually understand whether it is from France or from the United States, because the structure is very, very similar. So here, then we can actually understand that this is something very general, right? And the infrastructure has some similarities between different cities. So you can actually take a moment to see each structure and tell yourself about some similarities. If you have any if you think there is any similarities between the maps of France and US. But in fact, I can already kind of give you a hint, right? Which is the similarity between the hubs, right? In each city, like in Romania, it is Bucharest, is a big hub, right? And these hubs, they are providing you the information about how many, for example, people are living there, but also how many people are traveling from this city to another city. And in fact, in the United States, for example, it is also very easy to travel from big city to another big city, right? So it is a similarity. So this is something which we do in our world very often, right? We look into maps, but we don't often actually think about how to numerically look at that, right? And in fact, numerically, for example, when we use our phone and we look into maps, it is something which is a transformation which we make from the imaginary, right, or some old city map, which we organize and which we create as a kind of a mapping challenge or a graph, right? So it is something which is created here, and in this website you can also read more about this. It was created in Romania. No, it was created by my colleagues from Romania, but they were working in Hungary, I think. So what can change in cities, right? Which infrastructure can change in cities with time? There can be different types of infrastructure changes, but mainly what we know is that city change, but evolves in time by adding elements. It's quite rare that some elements may be deleted, but it's also happen, right? If especially you can have some India, for example, cities such as the famous one is the one which was built by famous architect Le Corbusier, where the whole city was designed in a very, very specific way, right? And redesigning the city. Or in Paris also, that transformation happened when the whole city was redesigned, so some streets were deleted. So what can evolve in time? The take-home message here is that, of course, buildings can appear, right, as well as streets can appear. Sometimes streets and buildings can disappear, but more often we also have the tendency of the growth, right, of natural growth. It can be also seen as a kind of a growth process of a living being, right? That's something which is very similar to what you may have with a fungi or a mushroom or a blob, a biological living being. So when we discussed already with you about the how to transition for cities to the smart cities, we need to know that there are different approaches for that, right? There is approach of general data collection by companies, but there is also another approach which people also take, and they also are doing it when they want to do it kind of other way or like grassroots, right? This is citizen science approach, and we will talk about it, especially when in the context when we will talk about the Openstreetmaps. So services, we'll come back to that also soon, right? Services can be, of course, every time when we are somewhere in the city. Apart from having the buildings about which we know in the map, we also have services such as taxi, taking some shared bicycle, right? And this allows you to get from place A to B. But in smart mobility, there is a big problem, which is, of course, that nowadays, if you have one right type of transportation, it will not necessarily be easy for another type of transportation to serve right easily. And it's, for example, it will not be very easy to grasp or like collect the information or data from another service. For example, if you use Uber taxi, you don't know the data from Get taxi, right? The services also such as, for example, city planning and city urban planning, for example, such as the one for Chandigarh in India, city also provides services quite often where you can come and learn, for example, about which roads are constructed in your city, right? Or you can also find more information about planned constructions, but quite often we don't do that, right? So it is something which is very, very important to keep in mind, that if you want to live in a city where you will feel very very well and very happy, right, you need to take also some action and to be able to do that. So and now I think that not to overload also you with too much information, but also to show you something. I hope you see my screen now with application which was made developed as an open source analysis technique, and it's something which is quite easily made. So I will make you maybe test it. And so the important point is that you have you can also use the sample data here in order to visualize what we were discussing, right? We were visualizing the city mobility, right? So it is something which can be easily made just from your browser. So that's why we will look at it. And it's something which people like to show because the taxis in New York, right, and particularly in Manhattan, they are very known, right, the yellow cabs. So it is something which is very important. So here we will demonstrate you this. So I will try just to put my microphone, so I hope you hear me. So here, for example, the important points which you can also already see here is that there is there are two locations of data, right, of the city. In the city, you have the pickup and the drop-off location of the taxis, right, and you can also see here only locations of the pickup or only of the drop-off locations, right? So, for example, here you can highlight the location of the drop-off, right? And this will let you understand more where people usually go when they take a taxi, right? So it is already it gives you some information that, for example, for some reason, there is a place here, maybe it's some neighborhood, right, where people tend to live, and they usually go there, right? And you also can show the arc between two locations. But the problem is that if I will zoom out of this, the problem is that there is a lot of information here, right? Because there are more than 97,000 trips, right? So that's why this data is very, very is very huge. So people do not really have so much information about that, right? Or you don't really grasp so much information about that. But what is very nice, and I will post also the link to the chat so that everyone can see and try that yourself. I will post it here. So it is something which you can try yourself easily and see also with the data which you may find right in the data. So I will go back to the presentation with maybe a small break in this presentation slides we had with the program, this Kepler GL. I would like to continue, which will bring us to the OpenStreetMaps. I hope that all of you already know about OpenStreetMaps, and OpenStreetMaps is a resource which is really available for everyone. And one of the approaches, right, we are taken when we do work with the citizen science, for example, approach is that we share the information with GRASP. And the idea of OpenStreetMaps was to actually analyze the data which people put to the maps, so that it would not be available only for few people who work in the company, but they could also analyze it. So here, I will just go to this OpenStreetMaps example and show you also and demonstrate what you can do with that. So here, for example, in the notebooks, you can also see what exactly features you can get. For example, you can have this working with street networks features, and this will be something also useful for you if you want to use, for example, some Python code. But what I wanted to show you is that it's something which you also can easily do from your own computer. And one of the main idea of this OpenStreetMaps is that it allows people to make easier calculations with the city data, right? So all these links also will be available as well as presentations, so you can play with it yourself. And these graphs also are graphs which are extracted from the OpenStreetMaps graphs. So this is the information which you can get from the city, right, from the city streets, from the city maps, right, where, for example, here it is clearly from Manhattan, right, the Manhattan streets which we have seen. Well, here it is actually the snapshots of the streets in Kathmandu in Nepal. And you clearly see that this is something which is very different by the structure and by the way how it is organized, right? At the same time, it is something which you also can see here, that it is not really made easily by hand, but it's with some additional calculations, where you have also the colored color-coded maps, where you have different places highlighted by the color, where they are the most populated streets, right? So here you see that. So stop me if you have any questions, because I can maybe explain you more. But the game here, which you actually have here, is that you have to guess, right, from the perspective of the city streets, which exactly city is it, right? And this is an important point of this analysis which you can make. Yeah, so we have already talked a little bit about some problems, right, which we shared with you in the Miro board. And one of the problem was connected to the air pollution. And one of the main problems, right, of air pollution is, of course, when you don't really have the information about where exactly it is polluted, but you know that there is some lack right of monitoring, for example. And for that, one of the way to deal with this problem is, of course, to create sensors. One of the people who was working on that, my colleague, he was actually working, our colleague from India, also he worked on designing this kind of cheap sensors, which then later on would be able to be installed in some city places in order to collect this data. I must also, of course, admit that this is very difficult to get the information about where to install them better, right? So it is a very tricky problem, but one of the main kind of outcomes which people got there was this framework of creating these IoT devices, which would be later installed, right, and pre-processed. The data would be pre-processed by different resources. So, for example, here they were using the Arduino and Nucleo and other resources, which would be helpful to connect and to create the understanding of where the pollution is actually the most active, right? From that, you would actually create something, some other level or layer of the information on top of your network, which would be additional information about air pollution. And this air pollution information is sometimes lacking in even in the bigger cities in Europe where we live in. It is not easy to get this information. Nowadays, there are more resources. You can also check that in the presentation of the city lab, which was also given in 2020. So now maybe, because it would be good to have some take-home messages, right? Because we talked a little bit more about the smart city transformation. We talked about urban planning and different professions of urban designer and architect. And it would be good to talk more now about what people could be able to do as in the city labs, because the city labs is a new way of people to work with the city, to live in the city, and to be able to interact, right, also with the city. And as I showed you, one of the way to look into the data in the city lab, which we are using, is using this software for creating and collecting the geoinformation and then visualizing this. For example, here it is a project which we work on together with Belgium colleagues, where we work on the on the Belgium train networks. So train networks, it's something which people always use, and we know that sometimes trains are delayed. So the question which we are asking here is how much trains and the evolution of trains from one station to another evolves into creation of delays. So the idea was very simple, is that you have departure and arrival time, and you also have these trains, which are located here in different places, which would be departed from different places. And my colleagues were suggesting the model which would actually help us to understand how delay is propagating in this network, which would be a very important point. Then afterwards, for example, here, the main point of the visualization was also to show you not just the zoomed in or zoomed out representation, but also collect the feedback about the scales of the data, because unless you really know how your data, for example, looks like, you don't really know how to analyze it and how to visualize it. And usually when I talk about the data, I talk about tables, simple tables with information about, for example, how many trains have departed from one place to another, or at which time one train reached another train, right? So it is very easy to visualize and present yourself this information. Another example, which you also see here, but that was also a very confusing first to work with this data because there was a lot of information which we needed to cross-grain. It was a project about bicycles, where we have many bicycles in different places, locations in Berlin, and we do have some understanding about how bicycle location where the bicycle is, for example, left, right, will affect the next trip, but we did not really know how different bicycle systems with stations or without stations will affect the whole transportational system. And it turns out that, for example, for bicycles with stations, you do have just as much flexibility as without stations, right? So you just need to locate stations in a right way, such that you would actually be able to move from one place to another. Here I come almost to the final notes of the presentation, because I don't think we need to be very to give you too much information also, so that it's easier for you to get it right and think about it. Is some tips about how can you participate as a person who has, for example, his own computer, right? And you can even do it without computer. So here I invite you all to come to the Openstreetmaps website, for example, where you also can log in if you want, and also can then, if when you log in, you also can map some of the streets and map some of the buildings, right? And moreover, which is very important, you even can map some objects such as trees, right? Or some locations. For example, in OpenStreetMaps objects, right, you have a lot of information which people are already put there, right? So for example, in some places, people put information about the hospitals, and this is all human, mainly manually done information. But you as a user can always help people who develop this resource, open source resource, to edit the map, right? So if I live, for example, in Paris, I always can suggest these edits. And the way how you usually do it, you, for example, can come and also locate some trees, right? For example, if you know that this tree is a known tree, or you know that this tree is, for example, leaf cycle, you can also put the information about diameter, right? You even can make tags to this tree. For example, we know that this tree is platanus, and you know that you also can get this information in the open data Paris, right? So this is something which can give you some additional information, right? Or you can also locate the building, right? And if you locate the building, you also can, for example, this building doesn't have so much information, but you can name it if you know the information about that. Another point is that also you can find some additional information, or you can also allocate the area. This is something which also you can do easily if you want to allocate, for example, the tree, right? For example, we know that this is tree, and you as a person who who has already some kind of knowledge about how to use this information, right? For example, you can also say that, okay, this is a park or a cafe or some other information. And then why we do that, right? Some people then afterwards can use this information by requesting the datasets openly available from Openstreetmaps. And for example, if you allocate enough trees or not enough trees, right, around the location where you live in, then for people who are working with the data, it will be easier to understand whether there are enough trees or there are not enough trees. And this also is a beautiful, place to discover also how these open shared systems are organized. So I invite you all also to go and to see how one can edit these streets. Another opportunity, of course, is also always to collect and distribute open data on the city. And open data, for example, can be also some information about the city. For example, what reparation is needed around your place, around your park or road. Or you can also connect to some city halls or city labs. In the beginning, I also mentioned the connection with the citizen science projects, right? And one of the main project which I would say that one would maybe know in the area of citizen science is iNaturalist. iNaturalist is a project which was created by the community, and now it's run by the community, where people can allocate around the globe. They can allocate species, right? Because sometimes we don't know really as biologists. For example, we don't really know the information about how many species of birds or of other species are around the globe, are allocated, for example, around you. So this community was designed such that you would be able actually to do it. And so on this map, for example, you can also go there and see there which species, right, are located in this place. For example, in this case in Uruguay, right, and how many people were able to grasp this information for you, because apart from assigning this observation, you also can see who exactly allocated it, and since it's openly available, people can make some research on that, and you can also see what is changing in time. For example, how many people are creating this information, how many projects there are in your cities. So it is something which is always very interesting to do, and I'm sure that, for example, in Romania, right, we can also check with you now how many people are there in the places around Romania cities, where you can also find the community of people around you. So I invite you all to come to this website. Yeah, so I will try now to zoom in and also see that in the cities around Romania. So yeah, I mean, this is a crow, right? And this is a very popular bird, which you can find in each city. but at the same time, right, you always can find some other species which are more rare, for example, southern green stink bug, right, which people assign and which is very interesting. You also can understand the dynamics of these species which can be, for example, found or not. Yeah, thank you, Gaurav, also for joining. Yes, yeah, and I also will be, will be trying to get to some very conclusive notes and take-home messages here. For example, now, right, that we already understood that what we can do with you, I would like also to ask your feedback, and if you're interested to learn more about any of these challenges of the city and you want to participate. So it is something which I could also post here. For example, there are many resources about building happy city, and it is a topic which I think is available and is very important to think about for everyone, not only for city designers, such as, for example, Gaurav presented to us, but also for people who are interested in cities. For example, there is a quite interesting edition by Strelka Mag, who are making articles about cities and about architecture and about urban design. So one can always grasp some information about this futuristic and not only right ideas of this. And since we discussed also right a little bit about how much people can get information about the city and how the for example building can affect right the family living there, I could not show you Carpenter Center of the Visual Arts and this beautiful church right like architectural building in constructed by Le Corbusier, where you already see that right like here playing with the light, playing with how the city is itself right designed. It's something which gives you the building gives you some impression, some good impression, right? Or here it is a little bit brutally constructed, so it's the way how the architecture influences our state is enormous. And when you will be walking in the cities, think about it from this perspective. Think about it, or try to find some unusual architectural moments in the streets around you, right? For example, one small window, which is not the same as a neighboring one, can bring already a very interesting aspect of that, right? And it also can bring you nice feeling about how to live in the city and how to actually think about it from different perspectives, right? So challenges in the board, which we discussed a little bit with you, they stay. So if you have any ideas, don't hesitate to contact us, or if you want to continue to work on that, we can try to think about how to organize a special challenge hackathon on that, so that we would be able to work on that or together with you. And also another idea, which also I would like to summarize here with you, is that you can also, of course, contact us in the City Lab, but you also can look into the new videos which we are organized as in the form of the open lectures. And if you want to learn more about the architecture and urban design, you can always watch them in the channel which we just created. So with that, I think I would like to thank you for your audience. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I will write here my email address, and we can always stay in touch with you by email or else how. Yeah. So I think that yeah, I am finished. But if there are any questions or comments or suggestions about cities and challenges, or maybe I could go back to show any of the visualizations which I showed, I would be happy to do it. Otherwise, let me know if you have any questions about this, and we could also discuss with you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
It seems we do not have questions in this very moment, but all the info you shared, the links are on YouTube as well.
Perfect.
So when the students will watch the YouTube recording, they will have the info right there.
Yes.
And indeed, if questions, they will send it to you directly.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna, also, and Gabriela for organizing and inviting. Yes, I hope that you you will find some new tips for you, or will learn something interesting from the resources. Yes.
Yes, our teams are quite passionate about green technologies and green projects, and
yeah,
for sure they will find interesting your presentation.
Yeah.
And
yeah, don't hesitate to contact us, because some people indeed are working on this air pollution sensors currently now, and if you're interested, we would be happy to make more events on that specifically, because this was more general. So
yeah, yes, I was ready to just say that we might get suggestions from mentors or teams, and come back to you and
yeah,
discuss some more applicable, let's say, session. Yes?
we would be happy to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Yes, then I will finish the session, and yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you.
Well, that's it. Mulțumim, la revedere!